All right, I'm going to get started. Good morning. Welcome to day 37 of the online Rankin Technical College AWD1000 Web Development Technologies class for fall 2023. As I said in the email, today and tomorrow we will go over chapters 4 and 5. All right, we'll actually probably finish both chapters today and still have some time to start going through some examples. All right, and tomorrow we might already be ready. It may not be so much a pretest, but just an exercise for you to work on so that you can start understanding some of this. Now, as we get started, before I go over even the rest of this, I got an email yesterday from one of the students, and he said, I took the test, but I'm still having problems understanding these fundamental concepts. Can you give me a good resource? So of course I Googled it. All right. And I tried to look for some good resources. And one of the ones that I found was right here. All right. And I'm going to give this to you. Don't worry about it. Let's see. All right. And it's right here, as you can see. It's developer.mozilla.org/en-us/docs/learn JavaScript. All right. And if you go through that, now, would you want to go through every bit of it? There's a heck of a lot in there. And I mean a lot. But at least as far as starting to get going on here, all right, that if you look, I'm just going to, there, JavaScript first steps and JavaScript building blocks. You may want to look at both of those. So if I go to the first steps, all right, this is in there basically. What is JavaScript? A first splash into JavaScript. What went wrong? Well, that's really chapter 5. Storing information into variables, doing basic math, etc. I'm not going to run through every one of these. All right. But they've got those. All right. And then I would say that would give you a really, really good start. Then you could go on to the building blocks. All right. Making decisions. We're going to be getting into that in a week or so. That's using different if statements, etc., which we've looked at a little bit already. Looping code, we're going to look at the 3 different kinds of loops. Functions, all right, which is what we're going to be getting into today, building your own functions. Function return values, introduction to events. We're also going to get into that today, all right? And just so you know, if you care and if you don't, it's totally fine. But what I have done is I have done my own series of videos on, notice there's Java first steps, and there's about 9 or 10 of them in there. And then you go into the building blocks, and there's a bunch of them in there. Some people like to learn, and they like to learn seeing stuff graphically on a screen. All right. Other people like to read. Some people like video. Everybody's different. All right, so if you look here, that's 119, and the first one that I did was 95. So that's about 20 to 25 videos. You don't have to watch any of these. All I'm trying to tell you is if you're looking for another resource, you can either look on here and take a look at what I have done on here, or just take a look at what they've actually got out there themselves. All right. And again, whether you look at that or not is totally up to you. But the gentleman who asked me yesterday, basically to get going, this is what I recommended. So again, you can either take a look at my videos that are in here, and I will make sure that I send you all out the links to that. Okay. Or you can go out to here and I'll send you out that link also. All right. Now, maybe you think I don't need that. I'm already understanding this. That's great, because what we've gone over thus far in here has been chapters 1, 2, and 3. All right, we took the test yesterday, the homework for 1, 2, and 3, which we basically did together. That is, well, I should, the other stuff you were supposed to be going out over that free code camp thing and go through the first 40%. And I think for chapters 4 and 5, you're supposed to go through like the next 20%. All right. But hopefully you've got at least a bit of an idea of how to use JavaScript. Now, if you say, no, I really don't. Well, one of the things we're going to do today in chapter 4 is we're going to go over the examples that are in chapter 4. In addition to the chapters that are in chapter 4, in addition to the work that's in there, the programmatic examples, I've written a couple of my own, and we're going to go through those as well. After we get done, we'll talk about, as you can see right there, how to test and how to debug a JavaScript application. All right. So the idea is hopefully, between today and tomorrow, we'll have covered the information that is in chapters 4 and 5. All right. Sometime early next week, you will take your second hands-on JavaScript test, and it'll be on 4 and 5. Now, the only reason I bring that up is Monday of next week. You may realize it, you may not. Monday is the halfway point in the class. We're at day 40 of 80. All right. And after we do 4 and 5, what makes sense to you, we're going to do 6 and 7. All right. And then we'll do the same kind of thing that we'll have a test afterwards. Then we're going to do 8 through 11. Now, I may have mentioned this earlier. I may not have. I don't remember. But we're going to go through 8, 9, 10, and 11. You are not going to be responsible. There will be no homework. There will be no labs. There will be no written tests for 8, 9, 10, and 11. But we're going to go through them anyway. The reason we're going to do that is after we get through 8, 9, 10, and 11, we're going to go back and we're going to build that gym website that I've shown you before, because it'll give us a chance to use a lot of the stuff we've talked about in here thus far. You'll have some JavaScript knowledge, but it'll also give me a chance to show you how to do things in jQuery. All right. And you might say, well, if you're not testing us on that, why are you doing this? Because still 80% of the websites that are out there in the world that are being used today, out of the top 100,000 websites, as far as hits, etc., use jQuery. Now, some of them are pulling away from it as time goes on, but they're still using it. So there won't be a test or anything else in there. Then we're going to go over 12 through 16. Now, as you probably guess, the work in 12 through 16, especially 14, 15, and 16, is much more complex. So what I hope to do is to go over 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16. I don't know yet. We won't have a test on that. There'll be no hands-on test. All right. But you'll be responsible for some, most, or all of those written tests, and there will be some homework. I don't know what it'll be yet. I want to go back and take a look. All right. Then we're going to break away from the book, and you're going to learn something that's called React. All right, because it'll very much deal with what's in chapters 17, 18, and 19. But we'll spend a week or two on React. During that time, there'll be no tests, there'll be no labs, there'll be no homework, but I'll create a couple of applications for you in React. I would suggest that you follow along and create them with me. All right. Those of you, and it's not many in this class. I think there's 2 out of you that are in this class that have already taken the AWD1000 class, the C# programming class. So you people in spring will be taking AWD1111, database-driven website development 1, where you're going to be dealing with this stuff. All right. And that's the reason for going over it. Then we'll come back, and during the last week, I'll talk about this. All right, so that's kind of what's on tap, so to speak. So with that said, let's jump into chapter 4. Now again, much of the material that's in here, until you see it in action and until you start doing it, it might not make a lot of sense. All right. Oh, and I wanted to mention one last thing before we get started, because I've been asked this. I got an email asking me this, and that was, are you going to go over the test with us? The answer is yes. I have to check first to make sure that everyone who is in the class has submitted a test. I'm not going to go over the test until everyone has submitted it. All right. And if there were 2 or 3 or whatever people that have not, that's not fair to sit there and do the test right now. All right. But yes, we will go over it. It might be early next week. I don't know, but we will. All right. So as the authors mentioned here, in the last couple chapters, we learned how to code some simple but unrealistic applications using prompt. Now, simple is a relative term. You might look at that and say, these weren't simple, but what we did was simplistic. All right, as far as we just brought up a box that asked the user to do something, typically, now we did a little bit more than that, all right, but in many ways, these applications were a bit unrealistic. All right, so as it says in this chapter, we're going to basically start to bring together, all right, we're going to start to bring together the stuff. We're going to kind of bring JavaScript and HTML together. We'll put it that way. So it says we learn to work with things like text box objects. Well, you know what text boxes are. All right. We'll learn how to code blocks of statements called functions. All right. We started to work on those already. If you remember the other day, we went over that pretest, and when we did the pretest, there were 3 problems. The first problem was that BMI problem. I did everything in a function called main, so everything was in one function. Then we did another problem, which was that guessing game. And again, we had a main, and again, everything was in one function. Then we did the array problem, and I showed you how you could start taking your program and breaking it up into multiple functions. In fact, we had like 7 or 8 functions in there. We had one that, that inputted the numbers, one that put the numbers into the array, one that did the largest number, one that did the smallest number, one that did the sum of the numbers, one that did the average of the numbers, and one that printed all that out. That was 7 different functions in addition to the main function. All right. So you started to see what that was about. And as you can see, this chapter is really broken up into 3 areas. I'm not talking about the illustrative applications at the end. Yes, of course, we'll go over those. But first, we'll talk about the use of objects to work with data. Now, you might find that confusing, all right? And a chapter much later in the book is going to talk about how you can create your own objects. These are built-in things that are available to you in JavaScript for you to use as you see fit. All right. So we'll talk, as you can see, it's about 10 pages or so. Then how to use functions. Now, there's many different ways of using functions. All right. There are what are called function declarations, function expressions, and arrow functions. We'll look at examples of all 3 of those. Okay. Then we'll jump into what's considered event handling. And what that means is, how do you want the program to respond when things happen in the program, such as when you click a button, what do you want to have happen? And most of the event handling that you do, most of it will be centered around buttons. When you click a button that says clear, then it clears the screen. When you click a button that says calculate, it does calculations. All right. Finally, when we get done with that, we'll look at these 2 examples in here, the miles per gallon application and the email list application. And again, I'm going to bring up the ones that are in the book, and we'll talk about those. All right, so that's it for this chapter. So let's jump into it then. All right. Now, again, JavaScript has a lot of built-in things. What I mean is that rather than reinventing the wheel every single time you want to do something in a program, quite often JavaScript has a way and it has different you can use. Now, you've used some of these already. For instance, you use the prompt method. All right. When we wanted to ask the user to give us something. All right. We have also, in addition to the prompt method, we used, for example, we used the parseInt method. All right. We used parseInt. All right. And those are things that are built in to JavaScript. They mentioned the toFixed one. That if you use toFixed with a 2 in the end, for example, if I was working with dollars and cents, that would give me the cents figure. We use the toFixed for BMI, so our BMI was to 2 decimal places. All right, but there's a boatload of other things that you can use. All right, now, again, you may or may not understand any of this, but it says an object is a collection of methods that do actions and properties that contain data. All right. And I may have even given this example before, but if you look at it, let's just keep it simple. Let's just say that we have an object that we're going to create, and we're going to call that object person. All right. And we're going to say that each person has what? An eye color, they have a hair color, they have a height, they have a weight, and let's say they have a gender. I'm going to keep it right there. Those 5 things that are in there that I just showed you, those would all be properties of a person. That's data about a person. All right. So when they talk about properties, that's what you're talking about. Now, you might say, well, what about this and what about that? When you create your own object, when you create your own object, it only has the properties you give it. And it only has the methods that you give it. So for instance, if I came in here now and wrote methods, all right, and I'm going to do the same type of thing. And I'm going to put in here eat, and I'll put in parentheses afterwards. I'll explain why in a second. Drink. And sleep. These are methods. Methods are kind of like behaviors because we all eat, we all drink, and we all sleep. The only thing that differentiates a property from a method in our example is that methods have parentheses afterwards. And sometimes we put things in these parentheses, and sometimes we don't. All right. Why should you care? Well, for example, let's say that I came in here and I said eat, and I said cake. Well, that would allow this person to eat some cake. We'd say, well, I don't like cake. I like pie. We would just change cake to pie. All right. And to drink. We might say in here, milk. And you might say, I hate milk. Well, you could drink something else. All right. And in here, we would maybe put in a number because we want to sleep 8 hours. All right. Somebody else might say, geez, I don't never sleep more than 6, but you get the idea. So person would be the object, and these would be the properties and the methods of the person. Now, these would be the only thing a person could do. They would have 5 properties. They would have 3 methods. All right. They wouldn't be able to do anything else. And if you say, what about this? What? Not if you don't program them in there. So again, when you start to create your own methods, they're only as smart as you make them. All right. And again, JavaScript has a bunch of built-in things as well. All right, let's take a look at a couple of these. There's a window, and that's a window object. Notice what it says. It represents the open browser window. And literally, there are probably 50 or more things that are in here. And they're all sorts of things. The size of the window, maybe the background color of the window, etc. There's all sorts of different things. Now, inside of the browser window, what we have been programming virtually all semester is a document. And when I say a document, we made HTML documents, we made CSS documents. Now we're starting to make JavaScript documents. So if I want to be able to write, for example, to an HTML page, I can use what's called a document.write method. It's not used that often, but I can actually write to a web page. All right. And as it says, even more importantly there, it allows you to work with something that we're going to talk about when we get to chapter 6, and that's the DOM, or the document object model. Let's just put that off until we get to chapter 6. All right. Then we've got Navigator, and that's got information about the browser. What you can typically find out from there are things like what browser is the user using? What version of that browser is the user using? You typically can even see things like platform. In other words, are they looking at this using a Windows machine? Are they using a Linux machine? Are they using an Apple or a Mac machine or something else? All right. Then there's history. And most people don't realize that virtually every single website you've ever looked at, all right, is contained in a history someplace. And even if I come up here and I click here, this is way up in the upper right-hand corner, and I go to settings, all right, someplace in here, I don't remember where it is. I think it's privacy and security. There, clear browsing data. There's my browsing history. And I can clear everything that's in there. And when I do it, it'll ask me, do I want to clear everything for the last week? Do I want to clear everything for the last month? Do I want to clear everything forever? All right. But even if you choose forever, there are typically ways that people can come back. Whoops, sorry. That people can come back and find out, all right, what your history is. All right. People who know a lot more about that than I do, they can dig through and find that. All right. So as it says, these are all things that are that exist and that are utilized with the browser environment. So kind of with what we've been doing. Then JavaScript has a list of some of the things that they have available to you. All right. So again, notice object. It says the base object that all JavaScript objects inherit. If you go, I don't know what that means, kind of like the patriarch or the grand poobah, whatever you want to call it, it's the thing at the top. Everything inherits from object. All right. Then we've got an array, which we started to look at. As it says, it's a collection of data. But what you'll see in a later chapter is arrays are objects, and arrays have a lot of built-in different properties. We started to look at dates, which is an object, as it says, that stores not only a date, but a time. And we looked at that earlier in the semester, and we talked about, just grabbing, if you remember, one of the first programs we did. All right, and we'll look at it again later. There's a function object, and that's what we're going to start getting into, all right, in this chapter. There are built-in JavaScript functions, and you can create your own, okay? There are number objects. One of the things about JavaScript is basically, now I'm gonna be a little bit here, I'm just gonna say it, and that is a little bit general or generic right here, all right? But the JavaScript, there are things like strings, numbers, and believe it or not, There's not a whole heck of a lot else. I'm not saying there aren't other types, but more or less, this is just about everything. And when you create a string, so let's say I wanted to create the string hello, I can either do it like this, or I can do it like this. All right. So strings have to be within double quotes or single quotes. But if I do this, technically, that string is not the string 451. That is the string 451, and it has no numeric value. All right. On the other hand, JavaScript is a bit unique in that it handles all numbers the same, whether it's a whole number or whether it's a number with a decimal place in it. Those are both number objects. And there's certain things that you can do with strings, and there's certain things that you can do with numbers. All right. And they do give a couple of examples on the rest of the page here. All right. There are also Boolean objects. And remember, Boolean is a value. And with Boolean, it's either true or it's false. That's the only thing that the computer understands. Some books will refer to Boolean as true, false. Some will refer to it as 1, 0, where 1 is true and 0 is false. Some books will refer to it that true is on and false is off. All right. It just depends on the book you read. I basically adhere to the true false thing. Then there's math. JavaScript has the ability to sit there and, for example, to find out the square root of something for you, the biggest value in a thing of numbers for you, the smallest in a thing of numbers for you, square root, square, and there's a bunch of other stuff. All right. So here, as it said, example how a number object, well, is this that big a thing? No. But notice what happens here. If I say const pi equal 3.14159, all right, now pi holds a primitive. Primitive means basically simple number data type. All right, and then you print it out. And that prints it out to 2 decimal places. So that would print out 3.14. All right. Now I don't want to sit and read this to you. Okay, because a lot of people get turned off. I do when I'm listening to anybody talk and they sit and read stuff on a page for you. All right, you can take a look at it. Do notice this. JavaScript has built-in objects. We just looked at some of them. And as it says later on in the book, you learn how to create your own objects. All right. And is it hard? Actually, I just showed you how to create a person object. So as an example, with that example I gave you before, all right, if I had something like this, I could come in and say something like this. Person Jeff equals new person. All right. And whether I put something into those parentheses or not would be up to me. But for instance, I could say Jeff.eyeColor equal blue. Jeff.hair color, even though there's not much left, equals brown, etc. All right. And I can even say Jeff.drink, because right in front of me right now, I've got water. All right. So that's how you would create an object. And that's how you could work with the properties of an object or the methods of an object. That stuff we're going to look at later on in the course. All right, quite a bit later, but just to show you that. So you can make your own objects. But that said, JavaScript has a boatload of objects already that you can work with, such as the window object. And we've looked at some of this stuff. All right, we've looked at parse int and we've looked at parse float. We'll talk about confirm in a moment. All right. But you've done stuff like this. Now, notice what they're doing here. This is different than what I showed you. All right. They are putting the prompt on one line, and they're putting the parse int or the parse float on another line. That's totally legit to do that. Okay, I put the parse int or parse float first, and then put the prompt inside of it. So what they did is two statements. I did is one. Not to confuse you, but more often in code, you're going to see it like this. All right. And notice too that the word let is there. If you're going to run this program, and let's say that you're going to constantly be asking the user to enter any value like they show here, well, then the value is going to change then, or conceivably the value could change as the program is running. If that's the case, you use the word let. On the other hand, with what we just looked at a minute or two ago, with this, that makes sense to make this a constant. All right. Pi is pi. All right. Sometimes it doesn't matter whether you make something a let or a const. Sometimes it does. The thing is, internally, programs run faster the more const that you have, and slower the more let that you have when you set things up. All right. Now, the confirm that's in here, notice what this does. All right. It says confirm. Are you sure you want to delete this item? Right there. And it comes up like this. And if you click the OK, that's the confirm delete right there. That would actually delete the item. And if you didn't put anything else in there, no else, if you click cancel, it's like this never happened. So confirm does just that. As it says right here on your screen, it displays a dialog box that has both an OK button and a cancel button. If you click OK, all right, true is returned. Yes, you wanted to do it. If you click cancel, false is returned. You didn't want to do it. And you can add code to the true event, to the false event, or to both events. I mean, if you would put no code in there at all, it'd be kind of, it would be, what's the reason you have this? But a lot of times people put in the true event the OK, and they do nothing if it's false. All right. Now, they mention here that when you start this stuff, anything that's in there that's a window object, all right, like prompt, okay, it says it, which means I could put here window.prompt. We could put in here window.parseFloat or window.parseInt. You can do that, but it is superfluous. In other words, it's the default, so you don't need to use it. And you're like, well, fine. How do I know whether I need to use it in a certain way or not? You try it. And if the system doesn't understand what it is you're trying to do, you're going to get an error message. All right. And as always, that's the best way to learn. All right. The document object. As it says, it's the highest object in the structure. It represents the HTML elements on the page. And you do need to code the name of document dot something. So let's take a look at some examples. I don't expect all of this to totally make sense right now. What I do expect is as we go through this, it'll make more and more sense. So imagine for a second that I've got an HTML page. And on that HTML page, I don't care what's on it. But let's assume that I have an H1 and I have a couple of H2s, and let's say I have 3 paragraphs. All right. The first thing that you see right there is called query selector. All right. That's like, it's not the same thing, but it's similar to what we looked at the other day and what we'll look at in just a few minutes, the document dot get element by ID. This is similar to it. All right. But if I went in there and I used a query selector, and as I mentioned, we're pretending here, we've got an HTML document It has an H1, two H2s, and 3 paragraphs. If I did a query selector and I put H2 in here for what I was looking at, it would find the first H2 in my list. If I did this one, it would find all H2s that were on my page. All right, so do you want to find just the first one? Or do you want to find all of them? That's why notice it's query selector singular, and it's query selector all for the plural. All right. So finding one with query selector, finding all with query selector all. If you want to be able to write to a web page, all right, it's document.write. And you'll notice with all of these, so as it says, returns the object for the HTML element whose ID is rate. So this says, again, since it's a rate, since it's an ID, there really should only be one. This is the same thing right here as if we had said const rate equal document dot get element by ID, and we put rate in there like that. So there's more than one way of doing the same thing. All right. Then the next example, notice what it says. It returns an array of objects. So in other words, what that's going to return is the equivalent of all of the anchor elements that are in the document. And before you say, well, that's, why would you even want to do this stuff? What we're going to start going over in chapter 6 is how you can now programmatically manipulate that stuff. All right. Then we've got another one in here, another query selector all. So again, as you can see in both of these, returns an array of objects. All right. You can even use combinations. And you can use multiple things in here. So in other words, this is meant to find what? As it says, this is meant to find every H2 that's inside of something with an ID of FAQS and every paragraph inside of a div. So again, I'll leave this up here for a second, but as they mentioned in that first bullet, this document object will allow us in a couple weeks or so to be working with the document object model. Once you can understand how to program the DOM, then basically anything on a web page, anything on a website, you now have complete control over. And that's the big thing about it. All right, and there's other selectors that they mention in here too that you can use. They're just mentioning the ones that you would use the most often. All right, so how to use text box and number objects. Guess what? You all know what a text box is. We've created forms when we were in the HTML portion of the class, and we'd said something like input type equal text. That's what they're talking about here. All right. And basically with the other one, it's kind of like type equal number. So they're number objects. In other words, a text box can hold virtually anything. A number by default has nothing in it, but the only thing you can put in it, are numbers. Yeah, you can maybe put a plus sign or a minus sign, but they're just numbers. So if we take a look at some of the examples here, all right, you see the first thing that's in there says focus. Well, again, I have a form, and that form has, let's say, 5 things in it. It asks for a first name, a last name, an address, a city, and a state. Well, like 6 things, and a zip. All right. And if the first thing that I ask for is the first name, I might set the focus to the first name. That means that when the program starts to run, what will be highlighted, where my cursor will be flashing, will be in the field that says first name. All right. If I want to highlight every bit of text that's in a text box, I can use the select method. All right. Value is very important. Value is what's inside of the text box. Notice it's a string, even if there's a number in the text box. So if I ask you, in a text box, if I ask you to put in your age and you put in there 23, it's literally going in there as the string 23. So there's a little bit of work you've got to do to make sure the system knows that it's a number. Disabled means that the text box is still there and it's showing, but it cannot receive the focus, meaning that you can't click in it. It's not invisible. It's disabled, which means that you can't use it. All right. The to fixed we've already looked at, so I think we've talked about that one already. Notice that when you do this stuff, as it says, you can do what's called chaining. What does that mean? Document something else. That's chaining. When you want to do multiple operations on something. And basically what happens is, all right, you use this right there, and the output of that becomes the input, into this. And if you don't get that, you're going to see it as we go on. All right. As it says, you can use these properties to work with variables and constants. That's what they're for. All right. Dates and strings have their own things in here. All right. So here's a couple of things you can do with a date. Okay. You can get the year, you can get the month, you can get the day, etc. Now, some of this stuff is a little weird unless it's changed over time, and I don't think it has. But it used to be, at least, I know that when you did get month, all right, it starts with 0. So if it was January, it would display 0. Because all of this stuff is basically done the way computers do math internally. So month 0 is January, and month 11 is December. Now, if you find that confusing, are there ways around that? Yes and no. And we'll get into that in another class. All right. If you want to know how long a string is, you're working with a string, you can use the length property. All right. So if I wanted to know, if I made a sentence in there like, hi, everybody, how are you doing today? And let's just pretend there's 26 characters in there. I don't know how many there are. All right. But that was greeting. So I said, let greeting equal, hi there, everybody. How are you today? And I wanted to know how many characters were in there. And I call that greeting. I could do an alert of greeting.length, and it would tell me how many characters were in there. There's a lot of things that you can do with strings. All right. All of this, this index of, this substring, etc. What those are all trying to do is they are trying to come in, and they're basically working with a string within a string. All right. So as an example, let's, because we're living in a politically correct age today, right? So let's assume for a second that somebody decided that they were going to go through the Declaration of Independence, and any place in there where they had referred to males, men, he, etc., would be changed to they or them. Let's just say, as an example. All right. Then we could come through there and we could do like a substring. We could search inside of it, or we could search, let's just say we wanted to do the preamble for the Constitution, something like that. So we could tell it what to search for, where to start searching, the direction in which to search, etc., from front to back or from back to front. All right. We've looked a little bit already at the to uppercase. To lowercase, of course, would just be reverse. All right. Notice more about when you start to create these things in chapter 16, because again, we are working with objects in here. All right, let's start on this. I'll go till 9 o'clock and then we'll take a break. All right. Now I'm going to write something. You're going to see a better way of doing it later. I'm not what I'm going to do right now is I'm literally just going to write some, for lack of better words, stuff. All right. So let's say that I wanted to make an unbelievably simple calculator. This is not going to be pure JavaScript, but I just want to show you what we can do. All right. So we could say something like, let number one equal, and we'll say parse float, and we'll say in here prompt, enter a number. Okay, this is going to be a really, really simple calculator. And we won't even give it a default value. We'll just do it like that. All right. And then, of course, we would want to come in. I'm going to just do this again. And we'd make number two. And we'd say enter another number. All right. Now, we can come in here and do that is not a number type of thing. We can do all that stuff. But I'm not going to right now because I just want to show you something. All right. And that is now I'm going to come in here and I'm going to call some routines. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to make a function. Then I'm going to call main. All right. And in main, I'm going to call a few things. I'm going to say here, select operation. Okay. And then after we select the operation, we'll do something else. So why am I showing you this? If you bear with me for a second, I'm going to come in here and say function, select operation. And I'm going to say here, let's see, let op for operation equal prompt. And I'm going to say enter 1 to add, 2 to subtract, 3 to multiply. It's going to run off the screen, but don't let that throw you. And 4 to divide. Okay, so I'm expecting that the person's going to enter a 1, 2, 3, or 4. Okay, so that'll be the operation. They'll again enter a 1, or they'll enter a 2, or they'll enter a 3, or they'll enter a 4. Okay, and I'm just assuming they'll enter that. They'll do it correctly. All right, so I'm going to say here, return op. That's the whole function. All right, so now I'm going to say here, let operation equal select operation. So what's happening here? The program's going to start to run. We'll take these two values that are right here and we'll put them into main. So the program begins to run. All right. And it comes in and it says on the screen, enter a number. So let's say you put in 12. All right. Then it comes up with another prompt that says enter another number. And let's say you put in 7. All right. Then control is going to go to this routine. So let's say you put in a 3. All right. Then 3 is going to get returned right there, and it's going to be stuffed into here. All right. Now, then we're going to do this. We're going to say if operation equal 1. We're going to call our own routine that we'll write in just a minute that's called add. And it's going to need number 1, and it's going to need number 2. All right. And that's going to be it for that. Else, if operation equal 2, we're going to call a different routine that's called multiply. I'm sorry, subtract. And again, we'll pass in number 1 and we'll pass in number 2. All right. Else, if the operation equal 3, now we will call that multiply. And we'll pass in number 1 and number 2. Finally, if it's a 4, all right, then we're going to call divide. And again, we'll pass in number 1 and we'll pass in number 2. Well, what if the person running this program is a little bit dense and they put in something other than a 1, 2, 3, or 4? So we'll put an else in there to handle that. And we'll say else, and all we'll do is we'll do an alert that says you entered an invalid operation. We're just letting them know that. And that's it. That's all we're going to do. Okay. So with what we said before, we come in here, enter a number. We put in a 12. We come in here and it says, enter another number. We put in a 7. Comes into here and it asks us to enter an operation. So control of the program jumps down to here and it does this. And I'm going to assume here we put in a 3 for multiply. Is it a 2? No. So it skips that. Is it a 3? Yes. So it calls this routine. It calls this multiply. All right. Well, that's all fine and dandy. Let's create one more variable here that we're going to call answer. So I'm going to say let answer. And for now, I'm just going to set it equal to 0. It's not equal to anything. So here I'm going to change this to answer equal add or answer equal subtract or answer equal multiply or answer equal divide or answer will be that. In fact, we won't even make it an alert. We'll just do it like that. So the answer is going to be that. All right. Now, when we go down here, you'll see how simple these functions are. So my function add, remember that when we call this, all of these, we passed in number 1 and number 2. Those are called actual parameters because this is their actual name. Down here, I can call these whatever I want. So for example, I can call them N1 and N2 because programming languages don't care about names. They only care about positions. So number 1, that position, the first one, is now N1. Number 2 is now N2. So all I have to do here is return N1 plus N2. It'll add the 2. All right. Now I'm going to copy this. And then we'll have our subtract. All right. And it'll be N1 minus N2. All right. Multiply. And it'll be N1 times N2. Now, divide's a little bit of a different animal. What do I mean? Well, if I do this and I say divide, and I do this, JavaScript is one of the few programming languages that I know that actually will return the number infinity. All right. We don't want to do that. So we're going to check to see if we're attempting to divide by 0. So if N2 equal 0, we will return illegal divide by 0. All right. There's no else. So if it was 0, we do this and we get the heck out. Otherwise, we do this and we do the divide. So using the example that I showed you before, and that is we put in a 12, we put in a 7, we selected 3 for our operation, meaning that we called this. So that's going to be 12 and that's going to be 7. So it's going to come down here and it's going to return 12 times 7, which is 84. And it's going to shove the answer to that into answer. Then when I'm all done with all this, I'm just going to say alert. The answer is answer. So that'll come back with an alert that says the answer is 84. And now we have basically the foundation for a simple calculator. Now, it's not great It doesn't look like it's definitely not this. Not whoops. It's it's nothing like one of these. But you know what? We're going to build something maybe if we have time later in the semester that will look similar to that. It may not have all 8 of these, but it'll have all of this. And it'll have divide too. Okay? And you're actually know much of the information to be able to do that already. All right? So I just wanted to run through this with you to show you that there's different ways that you can write this. Now, one thing too, because we're going to take a break in a moment, but one thing too, just so you know, this is pretty ugly. This big if else. Not terrible, but it's pretty ugly. There's a better way to write it. We'll get to that in a later class. All right. But if you understand, if you can understand the logic behind what I just showed you, you're on your way to be able to being able to understand this stuff, period. All right. So, like I said, it is 9:01. Let's just come back, please, at 9:15, and we're going to pick it up on page 134 with how to use functions. Okay. All right, it is 9:20, so I'm going to continue on. The next section is on working with functions. And as it says there, a function is a block of statements that performs an action. Can't keep it much simpler than that. Now, what it should really say, they should add one word. It should change it from an action to a specific action. All right. And I want to tell you right now how and why programmers violate that rule all the time. Let's suppose that we were writing a program and we asked a person for, let's say, I don't know if I can come up with them, but let's say 10 pieces of information. First name, last name, address, city, state, zip code, email, home phone. Let's say we're supposing they have a landline. So home phone, cell phone, and something else. So 8 or 9 pieces of information, something like that. Technically, what you should do is if you're writing routines, you should write a routine for each piece of information. So there should be one routine for handling the first name, one routine for handling the last name, etc. That way, if you have problems with any of those components, you know right where to go to. But that's not how people typically program. They write one routine that handles everything. And in that case, that's not that bad a thing. But what I've seen a career as a professional programmer is you get a function and it's not that big. Maybe it's 20 or 30 lines. And somebody else comes in and adds 10 lines. Somebody else comes in and adds 10 lines. And before you know it, that one function is 500 lines long. I'm not exaggerating. I've seen one function, one routine that's over 1,000 lines long. And the problem is when you get into error conditions in that one routine, it can make it very hard to debug or figure out what the problem is. Now, it says functions can receive parameters, return values with a return statement, and a declaration. Let's just look at the example I just gave you, all right, just before we went on break. All right, so here's an example of a function that requires no parameters. There's nothing in there. The other functions, there's another one, no parameters. But there's a function that requires 2 parameters. And all the rest as well require 2 parameters. When I do this, when I say answer equals add, this is what's called a function call. I am calling the function called add, and I am passing to it number 1 and number 2. Number 1 is the first parameter. Sometimes they're called arguments. Number 2 is the second parameter or arguments. So when I declare this routine called add, I better make sure that it expects 2 parameters. All right. Now, JavaScript is very lax. And what I mean is you don't have to let the system know that these are numbers. All right. You don't have to let them know that. In fact, I'm not even going to get into it right now. You can circumvent and do a lot of things in JavaScript that it's very hard to do in other languages. Those of you who next semester will be taking the C# class, you can't do that like this. You have to let the system know when you call a function what kind of parameters they are. All right, but JavaScript doesn't do that. All right, so again, going back here, I showed you some functions. I showed you return statements, return n1 plus n2, return n1 minus n2. When you return something, by default, you should stuff it into something. So you put the return into a variable. Now, an important thing that's not shown in here is that you can only return one thing from a function. Now, you might say, well, what if I wanted to return all the grades in a class, for example? Guess what? You know how to do that. You'd put all those grades into an array. You can return one array that could have 500 grades in it, but it's still one thing. All right. So they're going to show in here again how to create and call a function. So here's a function that's called show year. All right. And it calls not our function, but it calls a built-in JavaScript function called get full year. So if we ran that one, all right, we'd call it by calling show year, which would come up here. Notice it doesn't require any parameters or there. And we'd make a variable called today, and it would be a new date. And then we get an alert that would say the year is 2023. Pretty simple example, really. Here's another function that returns a DOM, or document object model element. So this would return one thing. This is how you'd call it. So it would return the first thing, the value of the first thing that it finds that has an ID of email_1. Here's one with two parameters. So when you call this calculate tax, like we're doing here, you have to pass it in two things. Notice again, they use subtotal and subtotal, tax rate and tax rate. We could have called this S and this T if we wanted to. That would have been fine. So this would have then been const tax equals S times T and return tax like that. So there's a lot of ways that this can be called. When you call a function, it's also known as invoking a function. And again, when you call this, you must provide two parameters because that's what the function is expecting. And if you're going to return something from a function, you put in a return statement with whatever it is you want to return. You'll notice that in the example we did previously, this one, we aren't returning anything. That's totally legal because we're not putting it into anything. We're just calling show year. Here, we're returning something and it's going to stuff it into sales tax. All right. So there's certain rules that you are expected to follow for lack of better words. All right. So next is a function expression. Now, if you had trouble understanding the stuff before, you're probably going to have trouble with this also. But we will go over a few examples of this by the time the class is finished today. All right. So what are we doing? We're setting a variable, in this case a constant, equal to whatever gets returned from a function. So notice what we're doing here. This is the same thing as before, but when we did it before, we did it using this kind of syntax. Function, show year, boom. That's considered more old school. There's absolutely nothing wrong with doing it that way. Nothing. Later, I'm going to show you a calculator program that I wrote that uses this and does it more the newfangled way. You're going to see them both. All right. But now they're doing it, and notice what they're doing. They're calling a routine, and then we're taking the results of that routine and we're assigning it to show year. So that show year right now has in it basically this. It's a little bit confusing, but JavaScript is unique. It is one of the few languages that I know that allow you to put a function on the right-hand side of an equal sign and assign it to a variable on the left-hand side of an equal sign. All right. And you might say, well, what's the advantage of doing that? You end up writing a little bit less code. To some people, the use of a function expression like that makes more sense. To some people, it makes less sense. All right. And again, I'm going to show you an example of using these in just a bit. All right. Now, there's even a newer way of doing it. And again, you might turn around and go, wait a minute. Okay, so you said there's a regular function way, there's a function expression, and now you're going to show us arrow functions. Why the heck do they provide all these? Because the idea is, even though the syntax might look a little bit more confusing, typically, as you are provided new features and new functionality in JavaScript, you write less code. And I think I've said this kind of thing to you before, but just in case I have not, If you say to me, hey, Jeff, I'm going to have you write this code, write it any way you want. And if I write it with arrow functions, and I can have maybe 100 lines of code, and I write it without arrow functions, and it's double that, I'll use arrow functions. I'd rather maintain 100 lines of code than 200 lines of code. It's less work, and it means I've got less code that I can really concentrate on. Now, when you use arrow functions, you end up using this. This is an operator in JavaScript. It is an equal sign followed immediately by a greater than sign. This, again, you possibly could find confusing. In fact, let's go back. I'm going to do this. I'm going to save this example that I made for you before. And I'll even, I'll put it out there or do something today so that you can have it. But I'm going to grab this and I'm going to copy all of it. And I'm going to open up a new page. You may say, why are you doing this? Because I want to show you how we can rewrite this stuff that's in here. I'm going to rewrite add, subtract, multiply. I'm going to rewrite them as arrow functions. So function add, I'm going to come in here and do this. That's it. Function subtract. Function multiply. Now divide won't work exactly like this because we've got more than one line of code. But when you only have one line of code, hopefully what you realize is, wow, that's a lot less stuff to do. Now I can still write this as an arrow function. Basically, I do it. I think it would work like that. All right. And I believe then I would need a semicolon at the end here. But notice how much more compact this got. It works the same way as before. All right. And so what it is, a word function, the name of the function, any parameters it has, then it's got that arrow operator. And if you only have one line, it defaults to you putting return there, and you don't have to. So this means return n1 plus n2, return n1 minus n2, return n1 times n2. All right. And it can get even nicer than that. All right. And let's go back to the book. So I'll keep this one too. And I'll make sure you're sent both of these so you can see them. All right. So notice in here, again, since we have more than one line of code, we still use that operator. All right, then curly brace, and then one or more lines, and then we end after the curly brace, we put a semicolon. Normally, you don't put a semicolon at the end of a curly brace. All right. Here's one as it says. Now notice nothing is passed. It's got, I'm sorry, one parameter passed in. Subtotal. You don't even need the parens. Okay. And you just, so that returns this right there. Finally, we've got one with no parameters. So you say paren. Now, I will tell you that there's two basic reasons for using arrow functions. The first reason for using arrow functions is basically what I've already mentioned to you, and that is the fact that it's a more concise way, it results in less code. All right. The second reason is when you do a lot of work with server-side JavaScript, we're using right now client-side JavaScript. But when you use server-side JavaScript, you see arrow functions all over the place. All right. So again, it's more concise. There is the syntax for it. All right. says internally arrow functions behave a little bit differently than normal functions, but most of the time this doesn't affect your code, and we'll talk about it in a later chapter. So it's not something you have to worry about right now. All right, the next thing that's in here is scope. And again, will you understand this? I don't know. But scope is basically who's got access to something. All right. And if that confuses you, then let's take a look. All right. If I write a routine and at the top of my program, because this is worth mentioning to you. All right. If I had come back, let's go back to this one. We'll use the arrow one. It doesn't matter. I'm going to make another copy. All right. And I'm going to take these variables right here, not operation, but I'm going to take number 1, number 2, and answer. In fact, I'll just do number 1 and number 2. And I'm going to put them up above everything else. Now these two variables, number 1 and number 2, they are now what are referred to as global to this program. And you might say, big deal. It's a real big deal for this reason. All right. Now I don't need to pass them in. They're known program-wide, so I don't need to pass them here or here or here, oops, or here, and I don't need to put them in either. So I can just put in empty parens, empty parens, empty parens, oops, and empty parens. What I did by taking these variables and declaring them outside of any function is I made them global to the function. What that means is I can use them anywhere in the function, and everybody knows about them. On the other hand, when I had them, I'm not going to bring them back, but when I had them in here, all right, they were local to main. That's why when I wanted the other routines to be able to see them, I had to provide them as parameters and declare them in here. But now I don't have to do that. All right. Now that I did that, made these global, now I do have to change this though. This has to now become number 1 and number 2. I have to use their real names. All right. Now that should work. So when something is global to a program, it's defined outside of any function that's in the program. Typically, it's done at the top of the program. Technically, you don't have to do that, but it's considered good practice if you are going to make global variables to do them at the top. So a natural question would be, okay, this is a hell of a lot easier. Why not just always do it like this? All right. What you can do is when you have global variables, you can introduce into a program what are called side effects. And sometimes a side effect is what you want to have happen. Sometimes it's not. All right. So you can see this program here. Okay. You hopefully at least have a little bit of an understanding of it. I'm going to write another function down here. And I'm going to call it hello. And I'm not going to call it, like I call the other ones. All I'm going to do in here is I'm going to say number 1 equals Jeff, and number 2 equals Scott. Kind of stupid, but that's what I'm going to do. All right. Now, right before I put down this answer, I'm going to call hello. All right. So we come in here. Let's say we do everything like we're supposed to. I used 12 and 7 before. Enter a number. We put 12. Enter another number. We put 7. All right. Select operation. We choose 3. All right. It's a 3, so answer equals multiply. All right. And now we come in here, and in fact, I don't even have to do this. I'm going to change answer is now equal to me, Jeff Scott, like that. All right. Now to do this, answer will now have to be global. So I'm moving it up here. All right. So it's now known program wide. Now I did everything right. And answer is 84. But I call hello. Now it's Jeff Scott. The reason I'm telling you that is now no matter what we enter in our program, it's going to come back and say the answer is Jeff Scott. All right. That would be an unwanted side effect. So a side effect means in a program that when you make variables global, that any function that's in the program can change the value of a global variable. Sometimes that's what you want. But as programs get bigger and bigger and bigger, you don't want that to happen. So that would be, again, a side effect. All right. And they do talk about that in here. So again, the scope basically is who has access to it. When you define variables and constants outside of any functions, they're global variables or constants, so their scope is global. When you define them inside of a function, they're local variables or local constants. What that means then is, all right, since they're local, if you want to use them in other routines, you must pass them to those routines. All right. Now they talk in here about let and var, and var is nasty. Var is short for variable. And that's how you used to define variables. You'd say var followed by the name of the variable. That's considered, pardon my French, piss poor practice today. Pretend var doesn't even exist and just concentrate on let and const. Finally, as they say on the bottom, in general, you should use local variables instead of global variables. All right. It just makes your program. I'm trying to think of a way to put it. You're going to end up in the end with less errors doing that because you won't be introducing the possibility of side effects. All right. The next thing that's in here then are event handlers. And I can almost tell you, if you didn't like what we did so far, you might not like this either. But events are things that happen in a program. Event handlers are how we react to those things that happen in a program. I can't put it any plainer than that. All right. In fact, they even say here, an event handler is a function that's executed when an event occurs. So if I click a button, what do I want to have happen? All right. That's the best way that I can put it to you. All right. And there's different ways of doing this. So it says that when you are working with different things in a program, these are different things that you might want to write events for. Now, I will tell you that with what we're doing, 90% plus is going to be button and click. But you can do it on other things other than buttons. Not only that, it doesn't have to be a click event. You know, there are mouse events. So while I'm doing this, my mouse is changing position on the screen. So I can do a mouse in and a mouse out, etc. We're going to look at all that stuff eventually. All right. Now, this may be a little bit confusing. Right here, event target dot add event listener, event name, event handler action. Well, it's like, wow, yeah, great, whatever. All right. Well, let's look at this example right here. All right. And we can look at the one above it is a little easier to read. All right. What this says, all right, is We are adding an event listener to something with an ID called submit button. And in English, what this says is when you click the button that has got an ID of submit button, call the routine join list. It's very important after that join list, do not put parentheses after that. That would physically call it. That's not what we want to do. We're sending a signal to the system that every time you click the button that probably says submit on it, on the face of the button, you should call the routine join list. In here, every time you double click on a text box with an ID of text box 1, you will call join list. So as it says here, and I will go over these, an event handler is a function that executes when an event occurs. To attach an event handler, you call the add event listener method. All right, and you can, as it says, it accepts a string. That's the name of the event that's being listened for. What are you listening for? Button click or whatever. And the function that will handle that event. All right. Again, as it says here, don't put the parens in. Not only can you add an event listener, you can remove it if you don't want it to happen anymore. That's done less frequently, but there may be a reason for doing that. All right. All right. The next thing talks about anonymous functions with event handlers. All right. If something is anonymous, it doesn't have a name. I want to say that again. If something is anonymous, it doesn't have a name. All right. So when you look right here, do we have names? Well, the name is show message. When we do it here, we never gave this routine a name, so it's anonymous. When we go here, there's the name, process entries. When we do it like this, we're not giving it a name, so it's anonymous. So what they're saying here on the bottom is, if you want to use the same function many times, you typically want to give it a name. If you're only going to use it once, you can give it a name, but you don't have to. And if you don't give it a name, it is considered an anonymous function. All right. All right. We're coming toward the end of the chapter, and I think 148, maybe I want to check. Yep, then we'll go over a couple of applications. All right. Oops, go back, sorry. So the next thing talks about how to work with an event object. Again, this is probably, or very well, could be a bit confusing for you. And when I say this, believe me, I'm not ripping on any of you. When I first learned about this stuff, it made my head spin. It's like there's so much stuff to learn. And as soon as you think, yeah, I got it, something else gets thrown into the mix. And you're like, well, geez, what the heck is that? All right. All they're saying is when you work with an event object, there are certain things that are connected to an event object. For instance, when you click a button, it assumes that you want something to happen. All right. I mean, we've always done this where we have a submit button. You click it to submit something, or you click it to clear something, or whatever. All right. Well, if you don't want that to happen, you can call for that button or whatever that is, prevent default, which means that whatever would happen there by default, don't let it happen. All right. Now it's going to get a little more tricky than that. So if we look in here and we look at this paragraph right here, all right, it says the JavaScript code below the HTML includes a function named join list. Join list handles the click event and the submit button. It says, notice it also has a parameter that's called EVT. All right, that's the event itself. You can call it E, you can call it EVT, you could call it hello if you wanted to, but by convention, it's typically called either E or EVT. As it says, if you pass that, you've got access to the event object that the browser automatically passes to the event handler. So you've got a little bit more power, so to speak, that you can use with it. And as it says, they're going to show you some of the stuff that you can do with this on the next page, but it is not an exhaustive list. All right. So if we look at what's on here, you'll notice first is current target. And as it says, that's the HTML element that the event is attached to. So if you used current target and you attached an event listener to a button that was called BTN submit, then current target would return BTN submit. The prevent default I already went over with you. As it says, it stops a default action for the event from occurring. Normally, that default action is used to make sure that if you press a button, as an example, let's say I've got a form. And on that form, I've got 5 pieces of information. First name, last name, address, 6 pieces. First name, last name, address, city, state, zip. All right. And they're all required. And if I leave one of them out, I don't want the form to submit. So I could check, and if any of them were empty, I could do an e.prevent default, which meant that even though I'm clicking the button, nothing's going to happen. All right. And they show some of the elements you typically work with default action. I can literally set it up and I can put a prevent default on A, meaning that even though I click the hyperlink, it doesn't go anywhere. All right. So there's different ways that this can be used. You'll notice in here, again, they're working with the event object. Until you start to see some of this stuff in action, it probably won't make a heck of a lot of sense to you. And then on the bottom of the page, modern browsers send an event object, as it says here, to the event handler handling the event. You can use current target. I already showed you that. You can use prevent default, and I already mentioned that. So let's look at the last 2 examples that are shown in here. We'll go over these. We'll see where we are for time. And then I will show you the 2 examples that I wrote. All right. And I plan on taking all this stuff I'm doing right now and putting it out there as a repo today. All right. Even all of these things that I went over with you before, they're not complete programs, but I'll put them out there even if they're as text files. I'll include them as part of a repo. So the first example is miles per gallon. All right. And it's pretty self-explanatory. Again, miles driven, gallons used, divide miles driven by gallons used, get miles per gallon. Again, like I said, I think at least that's pretty self-explanatory as far as what's going on. I believe, I really do. Every one of you in this class could build this and could style it so it looked just like this. Now, a couple things to note. First of all, that's what a disabled field looks like. It's gray. That means that if I put in 400 and I put in 12 and I click this, I can't change the result of what goes in there. And that's what I want. I don't want to be able to change it. All right, so here's the HTML. Other than disabled, there's not really anything new. And then at the bottom, we're including our JavaScript file. All right. So let's take a look at the JavaScript. And you'll notice that at the top, because I haven't been doing a good enough job of it, we should always be used to putting use strict at the top. Again, that just makes sure that JavaScript isn't sloppy with the way it does things. All right. Now, I use the $sign. If you remember earlier, I used the $sign and I said $sign equal, and we used it for for get element by ID. Here they're using it for query selector. That's okay. It doesn't hurt anything to do that. They're just going to be using query selector all over the place. I'm just used to get element by ID because anything that's in a program that you think you may want to be able to manipulate, anything in a program that you think you may want to be able to manipulate programmatically, have either an ID set to it, and hopefully an ID, and if necessary, a class. All right. So what are we doing here? All right. This right here is an error message that's going to say whatever this is must be a valid number greater than 0. And what does that mean? That means that if we put something, whoops, is that here? Yep. If we put something here that's non-numeric, or we put a negative number for either one of these, it's going to come back and it's going to say it must be a valid number greater than 0. All right. This thing, focus and select, that'll put the cursor there and it'll basically highlight that entire field. All right. Again, is that important? The answer is no. All right. The important part of this program is here and then down here. All right. So if I go right here, what are we doing? Well, miles equal parse float miles.value. That says grab the value that's in that text box, attempt to convert it to a float, and put it into miles. Then do the same thing with gallons. Then do your validation. If either we put something for miles in that was non-numeric, meaning we put something alphabetic, or we left it blank, or we put in a negative number, call that alert routine up there. So it will say miles driven must be a valid number greater than 0. Then we do the same thing with the number of gallons we used. And that's only going to, this one will be called, so let's say that I put nothing in there at all, nothing. Then it's going to actually find it here and it will come back and it will say miles driven must be a number that's greater than 0. Even if I leave this blank, because only one of these can fire. So I put in there 400 and I leave the gallons blank. Now it'll come in and say gallons of gas used must be a valid number greater than 0. So I put in a positive number here and I put in a positive number there. Then or here and here, I should say. Then I'm going to actually do the math. All right. And notice here, because this is different, I haven't mentioned this before, I'm going to say it right now. Notice we added an event listener here, and we added it to the DOM content loaded event. What the heck does that mean? That means that once the HTML has loaded, once the JavaScript has loaded, and once this DOM or this document object model has been created, so once all of that stuff happens, if we click a button with an ID of calculate, so if we click a button with an ID of calculate, we want you to call the process entries routine. But before you do, put the cursor into the first field, which is called miles. All right. As I'm explaining this, that for lack of better words, it's sort of coming together for you as far as what's happening. So again, if I bring this thing up, you've got this program. All right. I didn't reproduce this. You've got this program. And it is, let's see, it's in here. And I'm going to go to the student download, and I'm going to go to book apps, and I'm going to go to chapter 4. And there's the email list, which we'll look at in a minute. Here's MPG. This is the exact same thing. So if I take this one and I bring this one up in code, now they didn't do the job that I've asked you to do, and that is they did not come in here and write separate, I would have come in here. In fact, I'm going to do it because it's a good idea. I'm going to make a folder called CSS. And I'm going to make a folder in here, and I'm going to call it JS. And then I'm going to go and drag my MPG program into my JS program. Yes, I want to move it. And I'm going to take my CSS program, and I'm going to drag it into my CSS folder. Yes, I want to do it. That means that I have to go back in now to my index file. And where I've got this style sheet, I have to say CSS/MPG. Now it knows where that lives. And down here, I've got to say JS/MPG. Now it works exactly the same, but it's written much better. So I'm going to do a file, save all in here, and let's run it. And I'm going to run it the first time, and I'm going to leave everything blank. And I get an alert that says miles driven must be a valid number greater than 0. Keep your eyes on this. Must be a valid number greater than 0. All right. So if I put junk in here, or if I put in 0, or if I put in a negative number, that's the message it's going to print. But it says, again, miles driven must be a valid number greater than 0. So I'll put a valid number in. Now it says of gas used, again, must be a valid number greater than 0. And that'll happen again if I leave this blank, or I put in something non-numeric, or, all right, or I put in something that's out of range, meaning it's less than 0. So I think they use 12. Boom, there's your answer. Right now, I want to mention one thing that they don't say in the book. What's one way we could have written this better? Boom, very easily. We could have made this a number field. Then we can't put anything in it that's not numeric. We could have made this a number field. All right. What did that do? Let's run it again and look. Now notice if I try putting in non-numeric, it doesn't take it. I still have to check for blank, so I still can get this. But now the only way I can get this, all right, is either not leaving it blank or putting in a negative number. But I now do not have to check for it being is NA. Well, I guess I still can check for is NAN, but I'm cleaning it up a little bit. And as we go on in here, you'll see how to clean it up even more. All right. So again, you've got this program. All right. You should be able to run this program. You should be able to look at this program and ideally figure out what works, what doesn't work. It's a great one for you to make a copy of. All right, so you've got the original and then play with the copy. That is how you learn. All right. All right, then we've got this email list application. All right, and let's look at that one. So I'm going to do a file save on this. I'm going to close this, and I'm going to open up the email list application. All right. And again, I'm going to do this because I like to. So I'll put a JS folder in here, and I'll immediately move my email J into there. And then I'm going to add a CSS folder, and I'm going to move my CSS so it is into that folder. Then I'm going to close them both. Yep, they're in there. All right, and I have an index.html and a join HTML. Well, in that index, I again have to come in here and change this to CSS/. All right, this I don't have to change, but on the bottom here, I've got to change this to JS/. Now it works the exact same way, all right, as it did previously. So I open this. This is the same thing, the program you saw when we started, meaning if I click, now I'm getting the messages here. First email is required, second email is required, first name is required. All right, so I put in, what if I put in hello? Second email is required. Both emails must match. First name, excuse me, is required. So we're not making sure it's an actual email. But if I put in here, hello, we get the same error. Both emails must match. But if I change it back to hello, now we just get first name is required. And once I come in here and put in a first name and click, boom, I go to my other page, which just says this. All right. So the key takeaway from here is if I bring up the email list.js, start looking at this stuff. All right. What are we doing here? Again, this says as soon as the DOM has loaded, we're adding this event listener, which says when we click something that has an ID of join list, run this routine. So grab what's in the first text box, grab what's in the second text box, grab what's in the third text box. All right. Then this is our possible error message. It's not true, false, like we looked at earlier. It's just an empty string. Why? Because we can have more than one error in here. So if there's nothing in that first email, we add this to our list of messages. If there's nothing in the second text, we add on to that error message by saying there's nothing in the second text box. If the two don't match, we put both emails must match. And if the first name is empty, all right. If the first name is empty, okay, we say that the first name is required. All right. Now, if we had no errors, we submit it. When we submit it, it just brings up this that says, thanks for joining the email list. And if it has any problems in it, that's what's in error message. All right. So this right here, we added an event listener to our whole program. Then down here at the bottom, this is another event listener. Why? So if we come in and we add a clear button or a button that's called with an ID of clear form, and we click it, it's going to run this routine. It'll take what's in the first text box and clear it out. Then it'll take what's in the second text box and clear it out. Then it'll take what's in the third text box and clear it out. Then it will go and put the focus right there on the first text box. You might say, well, why is there one of these on the bottom? This is what's going to run when the program starts. And you'll notice that if we run this, where's our cursor blinking? Right there. Right? I don't know if there's any more I can actually say about it than that. We're going to build one of these in just a few minutes. All right, from scratch. So again, there's the JavaScript, but I went over what I thought was the meaningful stuff in there and in here. So as they say, the event handler for the click event of the join list button cancels the default action of submitting the form. All right. The event handler for the click event. There is an event.prevent default. That's usually how that is used. All right. And that's it. So what I'm going to do, we'll take a break at about 10:15. But before we do, I'm going to come in here. You're going to get what I'm doing right now. You will get a copy of it, but I'm going to write two applications for you. It's going to be the same application, and I'm going to write it in two different ways. So I'm going to come in here, and do I have one? Yeah, I do already. Okay, so I'm going to leave this as this. All right, I'm going to come in here. Yeah, it's still open. Okie dokie. Try it again. There we go. This is what we're going to build, just so you see it. We're going to have two versions of this. All right. It's going to look like this. As it says, it's a simple calculator. If we leave either one of these empty, we're just going to get an error message in here. If I come in and notice they're both set up as number fields. All right. But it'll do math for us, basic math. So 456 times 12. Calculate, and there's your value. It'll also clear, and it puts the cursor right there. So it's got a lot of the things I just mentioned to you. All right, so I'm going to write this now for you from scratch. We're going to write it twice. Once we get done, we're going into chapter 5. All right, so I'm going to make a new folder here that I'm going to call calculator. And it's going to have two versions. All right, so I'm going to come in here and let's just do everything from code. I don't typically like to do that, but that's fine. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create, I will have a little bit of CSS in here, but not a lot. So I'm going to create a folder and I'm going to call it CSS. And in my CSS folder, I'm going to put in a file called styles.css. All right. Then next, I'm going to come in and create another folder called JS. And in my JS folder, I'm going to have two files in there. The first one will be called calculator01.js, which is currently empty, as you can see. All right. And then I'll put in another one, another new file that I'll call calculator02.js. So I've now got those in here. I'm also going to add two files in here, an index1.html, and I'm also going to add an index2.html. And again, I'm going to write this, and I'm going to write it and make a couple fairly simplistic changes between the two versions, but I want you to see what I'm doing. All right. The actual HTML file, I could have used the same one. There's very few changes, almost no changes. But here's HTML1. So come in here, and as we always start, hit the exclamation point and tab. So this will be calculator version 1. All right. And I'm going to come in here, and the only other thing I want to put in to right here is my link. And that'll be s/styles.css. That is everything that I want to put in to the head section. That's it. But now I want to build my calculator, and it's going to look ugly until we add some CSS. I don't care. Also, I realized this earlier today when I was playing with it a little bit, is that what your instructor forgot to do was to set this up for small screens. That looks pretty god awful. I didn't make a media query. All right. And I'm not going to. If you want to, you can. You, of course, wouldn't have to. All right. So again, I'm in here. So let's start to build this. All right. So again, it's a simple calculator. And now that I look at it, I should have really put this into a form, and I didn't. So I'm going to put it into a form right now. All right. I didn't even worry in here about setting anything else like placeholders or whatever. I kept this almost remarkably simple. All right. I even just put in my own BR tags because, like I said, when I first did this, I did not add any. I want to repeat that. I did not add any CSS. I went back later and added a little bit, and we'll look at that in a little bit. All right, so we want this, and then we want our operator, and our operator is going to be plus or minus or multiply or divide. And to do that, I used a select with an ID select with an ID equal to operator. And it's going to have our 4 possible values. Plus, with a plus sign. Let me just copy this. So plus, minus, multiply, and divide. All right. So we've got that. Then we want number 2, which is basically going to be the same as this, except I have to change the 1 to a 2. All right. And then we have to basically come in here and we want to put in our buttons. And again, this is just the way I wrote it. I am by no means am I claiming, oh, this is a fantastic program. It's me spending about a half an hour sitting and writing something. That's what it was. All right. Now it's not done, but notice if I save it, I can run it. And there's what I have. Not real much. And after operator, I also want to add my 2 line breaks. So let me add those that go right here. And I'm going to save that, run it one last time. So let's look at it and I'll refresh. Did not put in my line breaks. Don't know why, but we'll get them. I'm not worried about it. All right. So again, we want our buttons next. All right. So I'll have a button here with an ID of calculate. And I'll have another one next to it. That'll say clear. That'll be the ID and it'll say clear. And I want a couple blank spaces in between here. So I'm going to put an ampersand NBSP 3 times. Again, normally I would do this using CSS. I'm not. All right, so we've got that. So let's see. We've got our, I don't know why those line breaks aren't working, but like I said, they're not. Oh, I know why. They have to go after the select. So now they'll, oops, now they will work. All right, so this is my interface. There it is. Not pretty, but functional. All right, and I've got my plus, minus, multiply, and divide in here. Good, everything is there. It's not working because none of it's been wired up to program yet. All right, so finally, I'm going to come in and I'm going to add another label here with an input, and that's going to be for my result. So let me put that here. And again, I'll put in a couple line breaks, but I'll put those in after my buttons. All right, so label for equals, I'm just going to call this what it is, which is result. All right, and input type equal, this can be text. It really and truly doesn't matter. This is just going to show the answer. All right. And again, the ID is going to be equal to result. All right. Finally, the last thing I want to do is I want to add my JavaScript file. So again, I can add it up here with defer or async, but I'll just add it down here right before my ending body tag. So script source equals JS slash calculator one script. All right. That's everything, but I want to make sure that it's working. So I'm going to go into calculator one and I'm going to put in here just an alert that says hello. So when I run this, it should show me the interface, but it should also then come up and show me the alert with hello in it. So let's see if that works. There's my interface. There's hello. All right. Okay, it's working. So I'm going to actually call this simple calculator version 1. All right. Now, I'm going to grab all of this code, everything that's in here. I'm going to copy it to the clipboard. All right. I'm going to open up index 2 and I'm going to paste it in and make just a couple changes. This will now be version 2 and it's going to call calculator 2.js. So the only difference you're going to notice is since we haven't put any code into calculator 02.js yet, when this runs, it should show the interface, but it won't show that alert because we don't have that in there. So there you go. Oh, and I want to change that from version 1 to version 2. So let's change that. All right. So we now have both the HTML files are now written. All right. So before we write the JavaScript files, it's 10:22. Let's come back, please, at 10:35. We're going to immediately write the JavaScript for each one of these. And after we get done with that, we're going to go through chapter 5. I'll see you at 10:35. All right, it is 10:35, so we'll continue on. I did come in and add some CSS. Most of the stuff that's in there is, I think at least, is pretty self-evident as far as what we're doing. And what you'll notice now is if we come in here and run this, more than anything else, it's just nice and big now. It doesn't work yet, so if I put in numbers, nothing happens. All right. The clear, I guess, is going to work, but it's just basically clearing because it's setting it off someplace. But let's come in here and start to run this. All right. So I'm going to come into the JavaScript, and the first thing I'm going to do is typically what I do in a straight JavaScript file, and that is to create an alias for document.getElement by ID. You've seen me do this before. So const $, equal ID. You know now that that's an arrow function. All right, document.getElement by ID. Okay, not a big thing right there, but the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and I'm going to write this. I'm going to write this one more or less, kind of for lack of better words, in the old-fashioned way of writing it. And if you don't know what I mean, just bear with me, please. All right, so I'm going to write a routine called calculate result. What this is going to do right here, what that line will do is it'll grab what's in the first text box and put it into num1. That should be pretty obvious, I mean, when looking at it. And then I'm going to grab what's in the second text box and put it into num2. All right, so I now have something in each one of those. And when I say text boxes, remember what I mean here. All right. So this is num1, this is num2. I haven't done anything yet with the operation. I didn't do them in order. You don't have to. So I'm handling this one and I'm handling this one. This is now num1 programmatically in JavaScript. This is now num2. This in just a second is going to be operator. All right. All right. And then this is going to be the answer. So I'll put some comments over here. Again, this will be the answer. I'm sure this comment is going to move over as soon as I save it, probably, right? Yep. So this will be basically text box number 1. This will be text box number 2. And this will be what I selected in the drop-down list. All right, the select, whatever you want to call it. So that's the first thing. So I've got all those variables. Now I want to verify that both text boxes do indeed hold a number. So I'm going to say if is NaN num1 or is NaN num2? Well, now I know that one or both of them don't have a value in there. So I'm going to go into result, which is that box on the bottom, and I don't care which one it is. I'm just going to come in there and say that the result dot value is equal to, you must input a number, just like that. So with what I've done so far, which isn't a lot, but I'm going to save it. I'm going to go back and run it. And you'll notice if I leave either one or both of these blank, well, it's not getting it. So something is screwed up. Let's debug it right away. Oh, it says, what did I do? Calculator 01, calculator 01. Looking for possible errors here. Did I call it result? I thought I did. Yep, there it is. ID of result. Value, first float, num2 dot value. That's correct. Operator is operator dot value. Result, if is NaN. Wow. Well, this is a little embarrassing, but what's supposed to happen, make sure I'll save it. In fact, I'm going to come back and save this too, and even this. But what should have happened there is, with nothing in there, that should have come in here and said, you must input a number. Well, if that happens, I don't want to do anything else. So I'm just going to type in return. All right, we'll see if we can fix that, but I don't know what the problem is. If is not a number num1 or is not a number num2. Looks right to me, but we'll just keep going. Okay, so if we get down to here, what do we know? Numbers were inputted into each text box. That's good. All right, so I'm going to say if the operator, that's the plus or the minus, etc., if that is equal, all right, if that's equal to a plus, well, what do we know? This is going to look very similar to what I did before for you. I'm going to say result is equal to add, and I've got to pass in there num1, and I've got to pass num2. I haven't written these yet, so if I tried to run this, of course, it wouldn't work. So numbers were inputted into each text box. All right. Call a math function based on which select option was selected. All right, so let me grab this. I don't want to do it like that. Like this. All right, so if it was a plus, I want to call add. Else, if it's a minus, I want to call subtract. See, again, hopefully how similar this is to what I wrote for you earlier. Otherwise, if it's a multiply, I want to call multiply. Otherwise, if it's a divide, I want to call divide. Now, I'm going to put a final else in here. It should never happen. But if for some reason nothing was selected, all right, I'm just going to say result equal. There's nothing to do, so I'll just put invalid operator. All right. there's only one more thing that I have to do in here, and that is to print out my result. So now, again, it's not going to work right now, and it's not going to work because we have not yet written any of these. In fact, if I run it right now, so let me save everything, and let me go back to here and run it. I should get an error now. No, it's not getting down to that part of the code, but it should say basically that I'm calling multiply, and there is no multiply. All right, or I'm calling whatever, and there is no whatever. So let's write those now. So I'm going to come down here. All right. And I could do this in a bunch of different ways. All right. I think I'm going to write it differently than what I've got. I want to try to use function expressions. So I'm going to say answer equals function subtract function add num1, make it n1 and n2, and n2. Let's see. N1 plus N2. I'm not sure if this is going to work or not, but I think it is. All right. So there's my add. Next, we'll have our subtract. And it's going to be N1 minus N2. You know what? This may not work. So let me just write it the way I did originally. Okay. So I'm going to have a function add here, and then this will just say return N1 plus N2. Because I don't want to go through all this trouble and then have it not work. All right. So we've got our add, we've got our subtract. We'll put in our multiply. And we'll do our divide. All right. Now this one's different, as I mentioned before, because if we attempt to divide by 0, technically the answer is infinity. So we don't want to just do this. It'll work most of the time, but not always. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say this. I'm going to say if n2, the second number, is equal to 0, then I want to return illegal divide by 0. All right. Otherwise, I want to do the math. And when I do the math here, I want to return this, but I want it to be to 2 decimal places so I don't get some god awful type of answer in here with, 10 or 11 decimal places, 2 decimal places. We're going to go over all of this in just a minute. I'm almost done. We're going to have another function in here that's called clear fields, which is going to clear everything out. Now, I don't want to set operator to nothing. I want to set that equal to the plus. That's the first one that we had. But everything else, I want to set equal to the empty string, which is nothing. Plus, I want to set the focus so that when the program starts to run, or when I click clear, my cursor is right there. All right. So one more thing I have to do, and then we can talk about this one. And that is attach event listeners to the calculate and clear buttons. And again, there are different ways of doing this. I am attempting to show it to you in what I consider to be the easiest way to understand possible. All right, we'll see if I'm right or not. Now I'm still going to have a problem because I didn't fix what came up in here originally, and I don't know what the problem with that is. But let me run through the entire program with you. All right. So I put this in so I don't have to keep typing here. Like if I didn't have this, I'd have to type right here. Anywhere you see a dollar sign, if I didn't do this, I'd have to type in document.getElement by ID. All right. It would still work, but this is just a shortcut. All right. When I click the button called calculate, this is what's supposed to be happening. It's supposed to do a parse float. So it's supposed to grab whatever I put into that first text box, attempt to convert it to a float. If there is a number in there, remember, this is a number field. So there's either a number in there or it's blank. So if there is a number in there, do the exact same thing, but with num2. I put it into num2. Then I grab whatever value I have put into the dropdown. So whatever dropdown value I have set up, all right, I put that in and I put that into operator. And then this is going to be my result. So I just declare a variable. That's it. I'm not doing anything. Technically, the value of this right now is undefined, but I'm going to look const ID. That looks fine to me. One way or one thing that many people do in here is if you do this, put a big D in there, it will not work. All right, because this is a case-sensitive language. So function, calculate result, paren, curly brace, parse float. A const num2 parse float, num2 dot value. That looks right too. Const operator equals the operator dot value. That looks right. Let result. Now, for some reason, this is screwing up, and I don't know why. If is NaN num1 or is NaN num2 result dot value equal, you must input a number and return. But that part wasn't working, and I have absolutely no idea why. So if we get down to here, you put a number in each text box. All right. If you choose the plus drop down, it's going to call a routine called add, and whatever gets returned from add is going to be stuffed into result. If you click the minus drop down, it'll call a routine called subtract, and again, it'll put the result in result. If you click the asterisk, it'll call multiply and do the same thing. If you choose the /, it'll call divide. And if you don't choose any of those, which shouldn't be possible, it should just say invalid operator. All right. Then once we've done that, we have now called our add, subtract, multiply, divide, or invalid operator. So we can just put in our result. All right. And these are our individual routines. So here we're just returning the two with a plus, returning with a minus, returning with a multiply. The divide we check, what is it? Our denominator, I think, is the bottom one. If that's 0, we return illegal divide by 0. Otherwise, we do it. but we do it to 2 decimal places. The clear fields is meant to do just that. Clear our first text box, clear our second text box, set the operator back to the first value, which was a plus sign, clear our answer text box, and put the cursor in the first field. Finally, we attach event listeners here. All right. And, we've got our different events. So if we find something, I don't remember if I need a pound sign here or not. Something tells me I do. I didn't put it in and it worked. But you know what? If for some reason I can't get this to work, it's okay, because I've got it working in my other one, and I'll just send you that one. All right. But I'm trying to look in here and to see what the problem is. So let's do a save all. Let's go back to here. Calculator 01, calculator 01, and let's run it. In fact, I should save everything first. All right. Now, again, if I get no output, I'm sorry, I don't know what the problem is. So, and I'm not, it's just boom, it's doing that. Let's see if it is giving me any errors. Okay. Cannot read properties of null reading add event listener at line 63. Okay, well, there's a hint. So I'm going back to here and I'm going to look at line 63. I'm going to remove these because I didn't have them in mind to begin with. So let's see if that fixes it or doesn't fix it. Still got nothing. Oops, not that. But it's not giving me any errors. This is the worst type of scenario in here. All right. So how do I fix it? Well, I'm going to show you kind of for lack of better words, the harder way of fixing it. All right. And we'll go over another way in the next chapter, but let's go do this. So I'm going to come into my calculator here. All right. And I've got num1 and I've got num2 and I've got operator. That should be obvious. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to put in an alert right here. All right. And I'm going to put a comment here that says debug alert statement. I'll remove that later, or I can comment the whole thing out. I'm going to say alert num1 equal num1 plus, and then on a new line, we'll say num2 equal plus num2, and then again on a new line, operator equal plus operator. All right. So we're trying to see if we can debug this. I'm hoping at least this prints out. All right. So file, save all. Let's run it again. I'll put in something simple, 1, 2, 3 here. I'll put in minus and 4, 5, 6 here and click calculate. Now, what do I get? It says that num1 is 1, 2, 3, num2 is 4, 5, 6, and the operator is a minus. So it looks like, as of right there, everything's working. All right, so up to that point, everything is working. All right, okay, good. So let's see. I'm in here, and I'm going to leave this, but with this is NaN, I'm going to leave them blank, and I'm going to press the button and see if it comes up that num1 is blank, num2 is blank, and operator will just set it equal to multiply. So I'm going to leave that blank. I'm going to set this to multiply, and I'm going to leave that blank. Click calculate. Says NaN, which is right, NaN, which is right, and multiply. That's good. All right, but it did not like it. It was choking right here. All right. So I'm wondering, my curlies look okay to me. So if it's this or if it's this, okay, result.value should equal this. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put another alert in here. And I'm going to say one or both text boxes are empty. All right. All right. N and plus, good. One or both text boxes are empty. All right. Now, what you might have noticed is it did look like where it said you must input a number, it looked like it flashed in there. Let's see if it comes in there again. So I'm going to leave them blank. Watch this quickly. There, it flashed. All right. So it doesn't like the order in which I am doing things. All right. What does that mean? Well, let's see now. I'm going to take that check for now. All right. I don't know what's wrong with it. It worked when I did it before, but I'm going to take it and comment it out for right now. All right. Just for a second. And I'm going to come back and see if this stuff works. Not getting anything there either. Is it giving me an error? Unexpected token, line 39. It's saying that there's an extra curly brace in there. Okay, actually, it's that one should be ending. Whoa, we've got one here. I didn't remove that curly brace. So let's see. I want to end right there. So let's see. I should have only one ending curly brace right there. So let's see if it works now. $22.12 plus. It said 34 boom, it went like that. I'm trying to figure out what I did in the other program that I didn't do here. All right. And just to show you, I'm going to quickly bring up the one that had been working. So let me bring this up. And again, if there's nothing in there, you must input a number. All right. I can clear and 123 and 8, 131 when you add, 115 when you subtract, when you multiply, 984, and when you divide, 15 and 3/8. So that's all working. So there's something that is in this other version of the program. So let's take a look at that one, because I want to give you right stuff. It's not that I want to give you something that's wrong. And let's see if we can figure out what the problem is. So I'll open this one up also with code. All right. And actually, I think the one that I'm doing now is number 2. All right. It's the exact same interface. So let's look at JavaScript calculator 2. All right. Just like we did before. Calculate result just like before. First float. There's our is NaN that's in here for num1 and num2. Same thing we did before, plus minus, multiply, divide, or invalid operator. All right, set the result. There's our add, there's our subtract, there's our multiply, there's our divide. All right, there's clearing everything, and there is setting up our event listeners. So I'm looking at it very quickly. It's 60 lines of code, but I didn't see any differences between them other than the one that I just did in front of you didn't work, and this one appears to work. So again, the idea with this is if there's nothing in here or nothing in here and I press, I get the message. When I clear, it clears out. If I put something in here and nothing in here, I get the message. If I put nothing in here, but something in here, I get the message. All right. And if I put in, it handles positive and negative. Now I'm sure if I put in a number that's too big, it's going to blow out of the water because it's going to be the bigger than an integer can hold. All right. But again, let's try 13 here. You'll notice that add works, subtract works, multiply works, and divide works. So it's all working. Like I said, if I knew what the problem was, I would tell you. I will take a look at it after class, but after my afternoon class, I'll take a look at it to see if I can figure out what the problem is. But you will be sent, or what I will put up the repo will be one that works. All right. Okay. With that said, let's go and look at the other one. I'm going to try to write the other one again, and we'll see if that one works or if I get errors with that one too. And if I do, then so be it. All right. So the first thing that I am going to do to try to make it easier, well, you know what? I'm not going to do that. I was going to say the first thing I was going to do was to come in here and let's see, this is the second one that we just did. So, all right. So this is going to be version 2. So I'll close that and that. I can keep, I don't need the CSS. So I'm going to open up here calculator 02, which is empty, and index 2, which is the exact same as the other one, again, except version 2, calculator 2. All right. And as you can see right now, file is totally empty. All right. So I'm going to start filling it in. And I'll tell you what, I'm going to go till 11:30 and we'll do chapter 5 first thing tomorrow. I already know what we're going to be doing tomorrow, but going over chapter 5 will take about a half an hour. And I'm not going to keep going, and just in case I wouldn't finish it. And you're seeing some debugging in action anyway. So again, I'm going to create an alias for document.get element by ID. Same thing you saw before. Let me close this, give myself some room. Now it's going to look very similar at the beginning here, but there are changes that are going to come. All right, so let me just put in the stuff that's the same. I want to see something real quick here. Nope. Okay. Back. Let's just grab this so you don't have to sit and watch me type. Just grabbing those lines that are right here. Okay. And again, kind of thing we did before. Num1, num2. I'm going to take that check later that we put in, and I'm just going to leave it out for now so it does run. Okay. Now, what you saw before was this, and I'm going to show you something we haven't gone over yet, but I want to take this and I want to rewrite it. Okay. And I'm going to rewrite it in a way that, I mean, I could have written this originally. I could have done this. Let me just copy this. I could have done this. So we could have come in here and just done this. All right. We could have said result equal num1 plus num2. And it would have worked just fine. All right. It's the same logic. So we could have done that. And I could have come in here and done all this. So just like that. Of course, this would have to be a minus. This would have to be a multiply. And this would have to be a divide. All right. I'd still have to put that code in there. But the point is, I could do this. All right. And there's nothing wrong with doing that, except again, what I'm starting to do is I'm starting to take this routine. All right. And I've got a lot of stuff in it. And if it gets more complex later, it's going to be even worse. All right. So what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to introduce a new statement we have not talked about yet. It's another way of doing what's similar to an if, and it's called a switch. Oh, all right, I'm going to copy this again. I hate it when students have to sit and watch me type. You see how adept I'm not at typing. Oops. All right, let me save this. Let's straighten it out. All right, so this will be minus, this will be multiply, and this will be divide, and this will be subtract, this will be multiply, and this will be divide. Again, I have not written those yet. That's okay. All right, plus I'm going to have a thing in here that says default. And I'm going to say result equal invalid operator. All right, so what I just did right here is I have replaced that if statement with what's called a switch. Now, can you replace every if statement in the world with a switch? Yes, but sometimes you wouldn't want to do that. We'll get into that in a later class. But this is the equivalent of saying if operator is equal to a plus, call the add routine, pass to it num1 and num2, put the answer into result, and get the heck out. Break means break out of this switch. If it's not a plus, it checks to see if it's a minus. If it is a minus, it calls subtract, passing num1 and num2 and putting the answer into result, and then get out. If it's not a plus and if it's not a minus, it checks, and if it's an asterisk, it calls multiply, passing num1 and num2, putting the result in result, and getting out. If it's not a plus, if it's not a minus, if it's not a multiply, and it checks, and if it's a divide, it calls divide. And again, it passes in num1 and num2, and it puts the answer in result, and it gets out. If it's none of those, if it's not a plus, and if it's not a minus, and if it's not a multiply, And if it's not a divide, then it just sets the result equal to invalid operator and it gets out. That, like I said, that thing directly is called a switch statement. All right, now I'm going to grab these. Okay, those are all the same routines that we had before. Okay, now before we do that and look at those, as soon as I get out of my switch statement, I want to set my result. All right, in other words, I want to set the text box that holds the result. All right, so now I've got my add routine, my subtract, my multiply, my divide, which will even check to divide by 0. All those are in there. So let's see, the clear button hasn't been added yet. All right, but let's see if it works. And I'm going to tell you right now, it isn't going to. All right, but we're going to try it anyway. So let me close this and let me open up index 2, and then I'll explain why it doesn't work. All right. We get nothing. And the reason we get nothing is we have not yet registered an event listener. So the system does not know when you click calculate to call the calculate routine. When you click clear to run the clear routine. So we'll put that in now. I just wanted to show you that. I knew it wouldn't work. All right, so we've run all these. Let's put in our clear function. Just like we did before. So this will change to num2. This will change to operator. And we'll set it equal to plus, which is the first thing in our dropdown, and this is result. It still won't work because we have not yet added our event listeners. So just like we did before, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to attach event listeners to the calculate and clear buttons. So it's add event listener. All right. And what do I want to listen for? A click event. And what do I want to do if it is clicked? I want to call calculate result. And in the same way with our clear, we again want to add an event listener so that if we click the clear button, we call the routine called clear fields. All right. Now let's save that and let's run it. With nothing, it did show NAN in there. See that just flashing. All right, but let's come in. That's fine. All right, doesn't like something, totally fine. Inspect it. All right, again, we're getting that same thing we got before, which means there's a problem in here someplace. Let's see if we can figure out where the problem is and what the problem is. All right, so again, I'm going to come down to here and I'm going to put in another debug alert statement. And I'm going to print out the results of all this stuff here. Let me grab it because I already did it once before. So let me grab it from here. Why? Because I'm just trying to verify that indeed everything that I've done so far up to that point actually is working. So I'm going to put that in right there. So it should say, I'll just put in two random numbers, 37 and 19. So it should say num1 equal 37, num2 equal 19. All right. And then finally, operator equal, we'll just use plus. All right. So let me save all this. And somehow I closed my index2.html. So let's open that and run this. So 37 plus 19, calculate. There's our debug. Num1 is working, num2 is working, and the operator is working. So far I know I've gotten to that point in the program and everything is working. Well, that's good. All right, so where did I do this before? Let's see. Oops. Supposed to be able to just drag that out there and get that to show, but for some reason it's not. All right. So verify that both text boxes do indeed hold a number. This is where we see, let's see, still get the same problem. So that worked. So I'm going to come in and put another debug alert statement in here. All right. So verify that both text boxes do indeed hold a number. So if is not a number, num1, or is not a number, num2, should give us an alert that says one or both text boxes are empty. All right. And it should say you must input a number, and then it should return, and that should be it for the program. All right. What happened last time is this printed, but this did not print, and I'm not sure why. All right. So let's see if it's the same thing here. All right. So if we leave nothing in there, not a number, boom. And before it flashed in here, you must enter a number. All right. So one or both text boxes are empty, and it did flash. Something is goofed up, and it's an ordering thing. I will double check later to see what the problem is, because I don't have a flaming clue as to what the problem is. But there's something. All right. So I'm going to take this whole thing and again comment it out. All right. So I'm going to go into my add routine, and I'm going to put a debug in each one of these routines to see if they're getting hit. So I have to put it first before I return something. So again, a debug alert, and I'm going to say alert and 1 equals and then finally, I also want to print out the operator equals. All right, and I'm going to take this and I'm going to, oops, not do that. I'm going to take this and I'm going to copy it and put this into each one of my routines to see if indeed it is getting into the routine and if the stuff is being set correctly. All right, I'll save all. Righty. Okay. I'll remove that one later. We've already checked that. So, okay. So the operator is not being set. Okay, that's the problem. The operator is not being set. Okay, and that's why I'm getting garbage. Now, why isn't the operator being set? I don't know, but I'm going to look right now. So we said here, const operator equals $operator dot value. Well, we did check it. All right. We did check it, but remember, we've defined operator inside here of calculate result. All right. And well, let's see. We're doing a switch here on operator. So that should be okay. Let's do another debug right here. Right? I'm going to take this one that we did before, and I'm going to comment this one out. Okay. Current value of operator is plus. Well, that's good. Still garbage in here, but that's okay. So minus, okay, multiply, and divide. So that is being set. So I know that everything is okay, or at least should be okay up until that point. So let's see if we can debug it and figure out why it's breaking after that. All right. So I'm going to comment this back out. We don't need that anymore. So result, if it's a plus, okay, we are calling this because we were able to print out those values. All right. And the reason in here that it's not printing out the operator is it's not known. That's why it's giving us garbage. Operator is only known here. We could pass the operator too, but we're not using the operator in here. So as far as what I put in here, we don't need this. Here, or here, or here, or here. All right. So let's look at it now. $22 and 2. That's correct, but it's just flashing. I think I know what the problem is, but I'm not going to be able to fix it in a second. All right, so it's working. And it actually, well, let's look once. 100 times 6. I think it's going to flash 600 here. Watch quick. It did. So it is correct. But there's something I did in the other version of this that I didn't do in this version. I don't know what it is. But to show you, all right, let me do a file save all on here. So I'm going to close that. Close that. And close that. All right, then I'm going to go open up the other version, which is currently called Calculator Old. That's the one that you will get a copy of. All right, and this is now Calculator and Index. Okay. Now, what I did in there, in that version of it, just so you know, because I like to change things up as I'm working, but just so you know, if I bring up the calculator here, All right, is I did the work right in there. Result equal, kind of what I showed you that you could do. All right. And if we run this, and again, we put nothing in there, we get you must input a number. We put something into the first one, but not into the second. Again, you must input a number. All right. There's plus, there's minus, there is multiply, there is divide. It all works. All right. So I'm going to clean this one up and I'm going to send that one out so everybody has a copy. All right. A working copy. And after I do my afternoon class, I'm going to see if I can figure out why one worked and the other one didn't work. All right. Then for tomorrow. All right. For tomorrow. And I guess I closed it, but that's okay. We have pretty much now beaten chapter 4 to death here. All right, so tomorrow we're going to go into chapter 5, which is one of the shorter chapters in the book. How to test and debug. Well, I've shown you some of this stuff already. All right, what I have not shown you are the developer tools in Chrome where you can set breakpoints and step through your code. That's what I'm going to have to do tomorrow. Now, just so you know, yeah, there's 3 types of errors. What are they? The first are called syntax errors. So if I want to spell the word else, and instead of spelling it E-L-S-E, I spell it E-L-S-E-E, I'm going to get a syntax error. All right. Then I can get another kind of error I can get is what's called a runtime error, which means everything looks fine until the program runs and then it breaks, kind of what I just had. And the last one that you can get is the worst kind. It's a logic error, which means that you meant to put down A, but you put down B. So you made a mistake. So we'll talk about those. And then, like I said, we'll get into the Chrome developer tools. All right. After that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to prepare, for lack of better words, kind of a worksheet for you. All right. And I'm going to give you some time to work on it. Or we could do it together, but I think you'd get more out of it if you'd work on it yourselves. All right. So that is what I had. A little bit early done today, but I will see you tomorrow at 8:05 to go over chapter 5 to fix whatever we can fix on chapter 4 and to go in and give you this worksheet. So have a good rest of the day. I will talk to you tomorrow. Thanks.